This presentation is the last topic for this Moodle. We will talk about climate change and deprivation mapping. We have gone through various topics about urban climate. In particular, how geoinformatics can be used as a tool for climate modeling and mitigation in urban planning. Urban cities are particularly vulnerable to climate change or extreme weathers because they often represent the most densely populated areas. And among those situated in the cities, the poor and the disadvantaged are most affected by extreme weathers. The figure to the left shows an aerial view of a slum in Nairobi, Kenya. Then the heading reads, Need for deprived areas maps? Why do we need to map the deprived areas? Because 90% of the population in Greece in the lower to middle income cities through 2030 will settle in the deprived urban areas. In 2021, Dr. Dana Thompson, who is with the Department of Social Statistics and Demography, University of Southampton, and the coordinator of the Idea Maps Network, gave a short talk during an NSF Convergence Accelerator event. The event was hosted at the American Geographical Society's GeoConvergence Workshop. The title of the talk is Mitigate Negative Geoconvergence, Map Deprived Areas. The link to the video of the talk is provided, and the webpage of the Idea Maps Network is also shared. Urban transformation processes such as gentrification, as well as the increase in poor urban neighborhoods, for example, slums, produce new urban patterns. According to projection, 90% of the people added to the planet over the next 30 years will live in African and Asian cities, and a large portion of this population will reside in deprived neighborhoods defined by slum conditions, informal settlement, or inadequate housing. Therefore, there is a need for an integrated deprived area slum mapping system in low and middle-income countries. This will help the governments, the city planner, and all stakeholders to make better decisions for the future. However, there is a lack of such data that can be compared across countries. There are different approaches for slum mapping, but none on their own resulted in routine accurate slum maps. For example, 1. Community-based mapping and manually digitizing satellite imagery. This is often provided by local experts, NGOs who have good understanding of the local situation. It is most accurate and context relevant, but it is labor-intensive and cannot scale to all cities globally every year. 2. The aggregating census and survey data. It reflects social characteristics, but it does not provide accurately the locations of slum dwellers. 3. Machine learning algorithms and computer models which integrate huge volume of diverse data. It is scalable across cities and with high repeatability, but they fail to create connections to the stakeholders who live and work in those areas. Therefore, the ID Maps network was created to connect these approaches and hope to provide a more integrated, scalable, repeatable, and more informed slum mapping. The Idea Maps network promised to generate citywide surface map of area deprivation and assets, and support stakeholders to use data for upgrading, advocacy, monitoring, and others. The target is to provide data that are to be validated by city stakeholders, comparable across cities, updated routinely, and usable by community and local government to seek equity and justice for all. In particular, the objectives are 1. To protect vulnerable populations from fines, harassment, or eviction by avoiding the delineation of exact slum boundaries. 2. to accurately represent cities as interconnected, interdependent continuums of people and places. 3. To enable results to be aggregated into larger user-relevant aerial units such as wards or health service areas. Here we share the link to all related projects, past and currently active, that are related to slum mapping. The idea maps were created since 2020, which build up on related effort in the past. Here we show an example in socioeconomic mapping with geospatial data in Mexico back in 2015. This figure of Mexico's grid was designed under geometric and cartographic specification of the Mexican Geospatial Data Cube, produced under the National Institute of Statistics and Geography of Mexico, or INEGI. It summarizes the socio-demography, the economic and geographical data of the country at the grid cell level. This figure shows a grid map of the population density and employment of Mexico City. It includes 2.3 million city blocks to the grid cells, consisting of more than 112 million people. The height of the bars represents the number of average employed personnel, from 0 to just over 20,000. So, the higher the bar, the higher is the employment. The colors in gray tones represent population density. Gray to white represent high densities. The figure shows the close relationship between low employment and areas with very high population density. Those areas could be identified as deprived areas, such as slums, where the employment rate is often low. This figure shows indicator of slum locations in Nairobi. It is an online tool developed under the Slum Map project. According to UN Habitat, around 1 billion people live in slums. The Urban Sustainable Development Goal, or SDG 11, needs the proportion of urban population living in slums, informal settlements, or inadequate housing as its first indicator to measure progress towards sustainability. The Slum Map project, or Remote Sensing for Slum Mapping and Characterization in Sub-Sahara African Cities, is funded by the Stereo 3 program of the Belgian Science Policy, BELSPO, and the Dutch Research Council, NWO. The project develops methods for mapping and estimating the population of slums, which are often invisible. The overall objective of Slum Map is to propose an open-source framework that allows for the processing of remote sensing images for 1. Providing information on the location and extension of deprived areas, for example slums, within a city, and 2. Characterizing their physical environment, that is, in terms of greenness, built-up density, etc., at limited cost. The figure is a modeling at city scale the deprivation probability of a 50 by 50 meter grid. Data input include Centennial 1 and 2. A machine learning workflow is developed using GRASS GIS in R in a Jupyter notebook. Ancillary open global datasets include SRTM, OpenStreetMaps, and WSF in 2019. This figure is a zoom-in of deprived areas indicator, and together visualizing morphological deprivation probability with Google Open Buildings. The deprived areas indicator is created with a much finer resolution world view satellite images at sub-meter resolution. The colors show the fraction of buildings. The red colors show very high concentration of buildings of over 50% to 100%. This also suggests high concentration of population within the neighborhood, which could have limited access to green space. With all the theories and geoinformation techniques we have covered so far, the next natural questions would be if those slum areas more prompt to heat island effect, and how much of the vulnerable poor population are exposed to extreme weather conditions, and how often. Could we apply some of the methods we have learned to check and monitor? The answer is yes. This slide shows one related project funded by Belgian Science Policy. The title is Earth Observation-Based Modeling for Making Thermal Inequality Visible in African Cities, or ONACAN. This figure shows how spatial analysis of areas with high deprivation and high temperature variations are important for mapping the unprivileged. We can make use of Earth observation-based models together with population distribution, temperature variations, and deprivation index to understand the exposure of the poor to challenging conditions. These figures are extracted from a paper by Simwada in 2019, entitled Spatial Analysis of Surface Urban Heat Islands in 4 Rapidly Growing African Cities. It reports on the use of satellite-derived land surface temperature to understand city heat island phenomenon, and the relationship between impervious surface and access to green space. The paper describes the findings from 4 big African cities: Lagos, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, and Lusaka. The increase in temperature, low access to green space, and high percentage of impervious surface, which represents developments, are associated with the urban areas. While it shows the effectiveness of EO data to understand urbanization and urban climate, to further pursue its applications on deprived mapping still face many challenges. Here is one of the challenges. In Coover's 2020 paper, The Role of Earth Observation in an Integrated Deprived Area Mapping System for Low to Middle-Income Countries, this figure compared deprived area maps of Nairobi, Kenya, generated with 4 different approaches to deprived area mapping. The first one, aggregated deprived household. The data source is Improving Health in Slum Collaborative. The second one, field-based mapping. The data source is Slum Dwellers International. The third one, human imagery classification. This method is developed at the Faculty of Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation at ICT. And the last one, number 4, machine learning imagery classification using Sentinel-2 imagery from 2019. Now, these maps do not necessarily match each other. To verify the accuracy and deal with the disagreements is not straightforward. Data uncertainty and incorporating data at different scales and defining the right footprints are constant technical challenges. There are different ways to map the deprived areas. One of the approaches is by deprivation probability index. This index is generated using various morphological features. The figure is extracted from Van Hoos's 2021 paper. The study area is Nairobi. It uses both multispectral and SAR images to calculate different morphological features at high-resolution grids 50 by 50 meters. The legend shows the area with high deprivation probability indicating deprived areas. Extraction of morphological features involve generating texture features using selected wave bands. Most researchers will include Herlich's gray level co-occurrence matrix as a conventional approach, experimenting different kernel sizes. In another study described in Owusu's 2024 paper, entitled Towards a Scalable and Transferable Approach to Map Deprived Areas Using Sentinel-2 Images and Machine Learning, where a more refined classification scheme is used to describe slum areas. This figure shows the view from remote sensing and ground-level Google Street View of the 5 classes in 2 African cities. The classes include structured large, unstructured large, unstructured small, unstructured mix, and pocket slum. The left figure are from Lagos, the right from Acre. This must remind us of the local climate zone classification scheme, which is also based on urban morphology. This figure shows examples of detected deprived area colored in red, overlaid on Google Earth aerial images. The cities are Accra in Ghana, Lagos in Nigeria, and Nairobi in Kenya. Different from some of the related works presented earlier that uses high-resolution data such as submeter worldview images, this work focuses on using conventional satellite images at 10-meter resolution. Scalable contextual features and feature selection algorithms from random forests are investigated. Comparing the 5 classes, the pocket slums are the most difficult to classify due to their smaller size, but results from other 4 classes show potentials. To recap, urban slum areas are most exposed to climate-related hazards, such as heat waves, cold waves, flooding, etc. The mapping of the slum area or urban deprived area have been investigated for the last 2 decades. Urban heat islands effects, access to green space, imperviousness in urban areas are additional indicators of vulnerability. Increasingly, Earth observation tools and new methodologies are examined, incorporating socio-economic data and networks, to create accessible, scalable, and contextualized mapping method for all. Data access and harmonization seems to be the biggest challenges. Here we list some of the references used in this presentation. Here we list some useful links, including the link to Slum Map Project and the Cure Copernicus platform, which is dedicated to urban climate adapt mitigation using Earth observation tools.